Hey, it's Teresa from Life Beyond Diabetes. And today I'm talking about something that's kind of hard. And honestly, I don't even know how to start. So I'm going to just say this. There is a deep wound in our country, and I'm in the US, deep wound. And I know that I am not the injured party here. Um, and as a white person, it's not my place to talk about the deep pain in a community that's not my own or to center my voice around the conversation, um, or to center myself or my response to it. Um, what I can do and what I'm planning to do today is to talk about the facts that I know about. And then I'm going to refer you to some more knowledgeable voices that can speak specifically to the experiences of the community, of the perspective of the Black community and racial minorities. Um, what I do know, where my expertise falls, is diabetes. And you know that. That's why you're here. That's why you follow me. And so, what I'm going to talk about today is racial disparities in healthcare in general and diabetes specifically. So, I looked up the statistics about the racial disparities in diabetes, and I'm not actually going to throw you statistics today. I'm in the process of writing a blog post that will go live later today, and I will post a link to that in the Facebook group. And also, I'll send out another email blast later. So if you're on the email list, you can get that blast and find out what's going on with the when the blog posts. With all the information that I'm going to provide today, some references and some statistics. So, but the statistics that I looked up to verify, I was actually surprised at how stark the differences were. I knew that there was disparity, but I don't think I knew it was so great. Um, and the summary of it is for diabetes is this, that in the US, the incidence of diabetes for, I'm going to look at my notes here to make sure I get this right. The incidence in US non Hispanic whites, so that's people who look like me, have the lowest incidence of diabetes. And then I'll break down the racial differences in the blog post that I post. But in addition to having the lowest incidence, the people that do have diabetes that are non-Hispanic whites have the best outcomes by a significant factor. So there's a huge difference. So, why is that? We see a huge difference in the not only how many people get it, but how those people do get it. So why? And the most obvious thing that almost everybody goes to first is, well, socioeconomic differences. We know that in our country, there are broad differences in socioeconomic status between non Hispanic whites and all other racial minorities. And and with the differences in socioeconomic status comes a difference in the ability to obtain health care, to access to food, education, and just general financial well-being, housing, all sorts of things that are associated with socioeconomic status can also be associated directly with health outcomes. However, even after you control for socioeconomic status, there's still a broad disparity in those health outcomes. So what what happens next? So the next most obvious thing that people look at is, well, there's implicit bias that is in medicine, and there's a lot of studies that show that implicit bias exists in medicine. And I will tell you, I am not pointing fingers here because I am as guilty of that as the next provider. None of us want to act in racist ways, but we do. And I work very hard to check my bias, but this is something that happens to all of us, and it has been deeply ingrained. And Some of it goes back to training. I can remember as in nursing school and as a baby nurse, there were times when I was told that um, certain ethnic populations would react differently to pain. And so, if somebody came in and they said that they had, you know, if we asked them about pain and they were saying, "Oh, my pain is so bad," well, I didn't believe them because they were probably exaggerating. Well, now I know that just because the color of their skin doesn't mean that they're exaggerating about their pain. If they tell me they've got pain, I need to believe their pain. But I was taught that is, that's a problem. So we have some implicit bias that is taught to us in our training. And then on the floor, I learned some similar situations. So there's other parts of bias that go along with that as well. So, for instance, it may be that it's assumed that somebody with a certain color of skin comes in or dressed in a certain way comes in, and it's assumed that, well, they can't afford this new medication, so I'm going to prescribe the older medication. So maybe a patient isn't being prescribed the newest and best medication because the medical provider is making an assumption about their ability. It may be assumed that they don't have the education or the intelligence even to comply with instructions. So the provider doesn't bother to teach them the things they need to know. Um, it goes deep. There's a lot of reasons a lot of ways that implicit bias in medicine can affect the care that is provided to a patient. So again, that is something that institutionally medicine needs to work on. I work on that myself, and I'm hoping, and I will say I have not been in any large clinical institution recently. When I was working in a clinical institution, it was starting to be addressed. I am hoping that it is continuing to be addressed in some of the larger institutions, and some of the professional organizations I am involved in. It is something that is being addressed more and more. I think probably not enough, but definitely something that we as providers need to work on. But those are the two obvious things that people talk about. Well, why do we have disparities? Why do we have these differences in the outcomes? It's because socioeconomic status and then the way people are treated in the healthcare setting. But there are two other factors that go much deeper into who we are as a society and who we are as individual people and populations that I think are even bigger drivers of the health disparities in minority populations. And the first of those is the chronic trauma that is lived by racial minorities. And in particular, I am thinking of a video I watched just the other day that, again, I will link to in the blog post. And in it, a black woman was describing her personal experience, um, her lived experience of life, um, and how hard it is just to have daily life with black skin. And she was talking about how often she gets pulled over in her own neighborhood. I want to say I've been pulled over, maybe 4 or 5 times in my life. Quick, either I was speeding or I wasn't, I get a ticket or I don't. 10 minutes out of my day and I'm on my way. It's usually a kind, quick interaction. I might cry because I got a ticket, but it's generally not a horrible big deal. This woman mentioned that for her it's a 45-minute ordeal. And she talked about the steps that she had to go through to reassure the police officer that she wasn't dangerous, and how she had to move slowly to avoid the police officer thinking that she was reaching for a weapon. And I thought about the trauma that must be to continually live a life where constantly she's worried about how she's going to live in a manner that she's not going to be hurt because of the color of her skin. She sees continuously, you know, news reports where we show Black bodies that are assaulted, and we show those videos over and over again. And we don't show videos over and over again of people that look like me being assaulted. How much pain must that be? How stressful must that be to be assaulted with that on a near daily basis? And the ongoing trauma of that and the stress of that. Now, I've talked a lot in the last couple months about the stress and the trauma that we collectively are all living through right now with COVID-19, and how that is affecting our bodies, and the damage that living in chronic stress does to our bodies, and ways to mitigate the chronic stress during this time of COVID. Now, I would like to extrapolate that to what must that be doing when you are continually living under trauma and stress. People with dark skin live that kind of stress every day. Now, it's not stress of isolation and global pandemic, but it's a different kind of stress, and it is continually living under stress and trauma. So that definitely has an impact on health. And that is something that is being looked at in the literature. It is not talked about a lot, but definitely it does have an impact. And I think it's one of the biggest drivers of these healthcare disparities, these not healthcare, these health disparities that we're seeing, the outcome disparities that we're seeing, is the chronic stress that people live under. And the fourth reason, and it's tied in with this stress one and the chronic trauma, is something called epigenetics. So, if you're not familiar with the term epigenetics, what that is, and I'm going to look at my notes because I want to make sure I get this right. Is first of all, it's kind of an emerging science. It's been around for a little while, but it looks at the ways that stressors on your body change your genetic makeup. So, and then the ways that that can affect your offspring and for generations going forward. So, the best example I can think of this that has been studied is women who are pregnant and give birth during a time of famine have babies who then go on to, if they come out of famine or move, are refugees in a country where they are able to have access to food. These babies grow into children and young adults who then have a high propensity for obesity. And what they found is that these children of women who are pregnant during time of famine are set up to survive continued famine. So now, which again is one of those things that would work really well if they continue to live in famine, they wouldn't starve. However, when they come out of famine, it causes problems because they become obese. So what we've taken from that is that as the body adapts, it prepares the next generation to survive. But those survival things aren't necessarily things that are helpful. So let's combine those two things that we just talked about: the chronic stress of living in a Black body in a world that has institutionalized racism and implicit bias everywhere, chronic stress, and then epigenetics that is passing on that stress response over the generations. And if we look at the stress that people in my country have been under for 400 years, so they lived under slavery and then segregation and Jim Crow laws and racism, and they're continuing to live under deep amounts of stress. And this stress, the stress response on their bodies, is being passed on genetically. How much harm must that be doing to their bodies? And then when I look back at those statistics that I thought, wow, that's a lot worse than I expected, I look back and I think, now that I think I've gone through all this, and I look back and I think, oh my goodness, I'm surprised it's not much worse, because the assault on the body from stress and then the continued assault from repeatedly genetically pushing, pushing it forward, it's so much to take. So that's kind of the four drivers of those health disparities for diabetes. And then the question is, so what do we do about that? And I have to say, that question is way beyond my pay grade, and I wish I had an answer, but I don't. And I know that I personally, what I do is, again, I'm working hard on my implicit bias, but I also know that it's right now, it's not about me, it's about listening to the people who are in pain and whose voices I need to center. So I will be posting some resources, some the links again to the. I'll have some statistics. I will have some links for resources where you can learn more about racial disparities. I will also be posting some links to some people that I follow where I learn more, um, where I learn from women of color, because the women of color are the people who I need to be listening to for the direction, for ways that I can support them. Um, and the one last thing that I want to say today about this topic is that if there are any Black women or men listening, um, is that I see your pain, and I'm so sorry that this is happening to you, and that this is the place that our country is. And I will keep listening. And that's all I got today. Um, I will be back on Thursday. My month of lives is done. I'll be back on Thursday at 2:30 Pacific, and I'll be back every Thursday at 2:30 Pacific for a live. I look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, be well. Remember that you got this. This is a hard time for everybody. Take care of yourselves and listen, and take care of yourselves. See you Thursday. Bye.